dismissal of Drake's lawsuit was wrong. And here's why. Remember the judge from the OJ case back in the day? His name was Judge Lance Ito, right? I remember him. That name. I kept up with that case pretty closely. And for whatever reason, I started to think about him when I was sort of reading through the judge for Drake's lawsuit, the motion to dismiss being granted. When I was reading through that, I don't know why, I just thought about Judge Lance Ito for some reason, and that sort of begged this thought: what if Lance Ito, when he was presiding over the O.J. Simpson murder trial, what if he didn't know anything about football at all? Anything. What if he didn't know that the sport existed, much less, anything about what that would do to someone like O.J. Simpson's status, right? In this country, right? Meaning him being more popular and regarded a certain way and what have you, and the opportunities that came with that, which of course includes the wealth that could be attained from that and the whole nine, right? And what if he furthermore didn't understand the racial dynamic of O.J. Simpson having been married to a white woman, right? And divorced from said white woman, right? That he was also accused of, murking, right? Unaliving, right? Whatever term you want to use, right? Wouldn't that lack of understanding by Judge Lance Ito, if this made up scenario were true, wouldn't that negatively impact his ability to accurately weigh the facts of the case? Think about that for a second. Of course it would. Of course it would. In other words, if Judge Lance Ito didn't know anything about the sport of football, and by extension, anything about OJ's wealth or status or what have you, then he wouldn't be able to see OJ as he actually is. He also wouldn't be able to really accurately assess things about the other people involved in the dynamic, right? And I don't just mean his wife or the gentleman that was also killed along with his wife. I mean any of it, right? Their family structure and just the whole nine, right? Anyway, this is my first issue with the dismissal, right? Is that I believe that there was a fundamental lack of understanding of the Drake and Kendrick battle, right? And perhaps hip hop culture as a whole. And let me give you sort of my primary piece of evidence of this lack of understanding, right? There are other aspects of it, but today, the one that I'm covering is this. The court never acknowledged the song Like That was actually the start of the battle. Let me say that again. The judge, the court, which is one and the same, never acknowledged in the dismissal motion documents at any point that the song Like That was the start of the battle. What do you mean that she said that the song Like That was part of the diss tracks, but she just didn't acknowledge that it was the start of the battle? No, I mean, she didn't acknowledge that it existed, much less that it was the actual start of the battle. Now listen to me. If that doesn't sound like a big deal to y'all, think about it like this. This would be the equivalent of, us teaching in a history course, right? That the North actually started the Civil War. Yup. They fired on Fort Southern Town, right? Versus Fort Sumter, right? The North fired on Fort Southern Town for really no good reason. And that kicked the whole thing off. Well, so what? If we did teach history that way, would that really change very much? Well, you tell me. Now, all of a sudden, the Southerners, the Confederacy rather, are no longer the rebels, right? They're not rebels. They're not rebelling against anything. They're peaceful citizens minding their own business. And they had to fight against the tyranny of the North, who literally fired the first shot of the Civil War, and they were just defending themselves. Now, isn't that a much different narrative than what actually happened? Of course it is. Could you imagine if we taught in history class, in a history course, that the start of World War II was actually because Poland invaded Germany? Yeah, those peaceful Germans of the 1930s and 40s were minding their own business, right? Just cooling out in Germany, minding their own business, and those crazy Polish people invaded Germany, right? So now the good people of Germany, of Nazi Germany, right? That's Adolf Hitler and his guys, right? Heinrich Himmler and, I don't know, I can't think of a bunch of the names now, but Hitler and his generals, right, had to fight back to defend Germany's honor because these crazy Polish people just wanted to take over Germany for some reason. Now, Nazi Germany, right, who has for the past, 60, 70 years now have been regarded as the avatar of evil, of modern evil. They are now, this group of peaceful Germans that were just fighting for, to maintain their independence. They didn't want to be taken over by Poland. Do you understand how the start of a conflict being told properly matters? It matters. If we don't properly tell how a conflict began, we are literally changing history in the form of a publication, right? A book. This thing that happened all these years ago, none of the actors are around anymore. None of the participants are around anymore. And we can just tell we can retell the story how we want. That's criminal, right? And so how it began matters. The judge made a big deal about the order of the diss tracks. If you read through, the motion to dismiss being granted, which is just the judge's explanation of why she ruled the way she ruled, she made a big deal about the order of the diss tracks. Let me give you a couple of examples. One of the things she said was, over the course of 16 days, the artist released 8 diss tracks, right? Because some of you might go, well, how do you know? How do you know she didn't consider like that, right? She may have just been speaking in general terms, right? In general terminology. She might have said the diss tracks. How do you know that she wasn't including the song like that in that? Here's your proof. Your first piece of proof anyway. She goes, over the course of 16 days, the artist released 8 diss tracks. Well, if we count the diss tracks released by Kendrick and Drake during the time in question, yeah, it is 8 diss tracks. If we're only counting the diss tracks beginning from Drake's first diss track, which was just a response to Like That, right? All the way to the last diss track, which was Drake's, Drake's final song, which was The Hard Part 6, right? That's 8 songs. 4 for Kendrick, 4 for Drake. I pointed this out months ago. We've already talked about this. But, 4 tracks apiece. And 3 of Kendrick's 4 were released in a 24-hour period. And I've already covered why that's fishy and insane that no one points that out, and how fishy that is. And how unheard of that is, and the sheer timing of all of his tracks being released. But that's another story for another day. Again, I've already covered it, but another story for another day. Here's my point. She's counting 8 diss tracks. The 9th diss track is a song called Like That, which was released on March 22nd, right? Several weeks before Drake's first response. Okay. Now, again, if that doesn't sound like a big deal to you all, that she's only counting these 8 diss tracks between the 2 of them, right? And even the whole, over the course of 16 days, she's making a big deal about the order of the diss tracks. Now, let me be clear about something. I don't want in any way, at least right now, at this time, for anyone to think that I'm insinuating that the court was being disingenuous or, involved in some sort of collusion or in some sort of scheme. The truth is, I don't know that. So I would never insinuate something like that. Like, I legitimately do not know that. I don't. And so I would never want it to seem like I am accusing the judge, in any way, shape, or form of some impropriety. I do not know that. I believe that the court is just ill-informed. I believe that the court doesn't understand certain aspects of hip hop culture and battle rap culture. But most importantly, in this context, I don't believe the court understands this battle, the Drake Kendrick battle, well enough. And that's the core thing that I believe they got wrong, right? That's the core reason I think that they got it wrong, why they did not consider the song Like That, right? As one of the diss tracks. And it seems like a small detail, but that informs everything after that. This is why I gave you the Civil War analogy. This is why I gave you the World War II analogy. How conflicts began. Being told, accurately matters. It matters. Another thing that the judge said is, she said the penultimate song of the feud, Not Like Us, dealt the metaphorical killing blow. Do you hear the narrative being sort of spun there? And again, I'm not accusing this judge of some improprieties, right? But let's be clear, okay? All judges are tenured attorneys. That's it, right? They're important, but they're tenured attorneys, meaning that they spent their entire career learning how to shape narratives in a court case. That's what they do. And they don't do it because they're lying or they're being dishonest. They're doing it because they have to translate this complex, sprawling legal case to a bunch of people that know nothing about the law. So they have to learn to translate all of this legal terminology in context to their client, to a group of 12 people that know nothing about the law, but still, keeping the legal aspects of the court case intact for the judge, because it's the judge plus the jury. Even if it's a jury trial, the judge is the judge in effect is the referee. all right? And they're going to maintain order. And so if they see any funky things going on, you know, they're going to hamper your case enough that the jury isn't gonna, you know, probably accept your interpretation of the law. And the same thing had happened to the opposition, right? And so anyway, the penultimate song of the feud, Not Like Us, dealt the metaphorical killing blow. Again, this is an attempt to sort of nail down a certain narrative for the sake of, you know, the public understanding it, because the judge is fully aware that we're going to read this, right? Penultimate means like, it means like, you know, it's in this context, it means next to last, right? But penultimate can also mean like the coup de grace, right? It's like, it's one in a number of something. But in this context, the way that the judge is using it, she's saying that, you know, it's the penultimate song of the feud. It dealt the metaphorical killing blow. She's not framing this like this bully that marched onto the schoolyard and beat the crap out of a kid that wasn't expecting to have to fight that day, and who was outmatched, be it the bully was bigger, more prepared, or tougher, or whatever, right? But she's not framing this like that, okay? She's framing this the way I told the story about the innocent Germans that were, you know, that were invaded by these horrible Polish people, right? Which of course didn't happen, right? In reality, that's the way she's framing it. And my point is it's easy to frame it that way when you don't consider the fact that Kendrick was the one that fired on Fort Sumter. Kendrick was the one who, you know, invaded Poland, right? Poland that was minding their own business. They didn't have any problems with Germany, right? They were minding their own business, and they were outgunned by Germany, outgunned and outmanned, right? And they didn't have a beef with Germany. And Germany also had a strategic advantage as well, right? And so they invaded Poland, and, you know, the famous, you know, Blitzkrieg, and they took Poland over in a record time, right? And so that's what it is. And so, you know, these are two examples of how the judge seemed to, you know, pay pretty close attention to the order of the diss tracks and the diss tracks themselves. The only problem is she didn't consider all of the diss tracks. It's not like that came out a year earlier. I could almost understand it then. No. Okay, no, that's not what happened. That's not what happened. All right. I want to point out one other thing that really bothered me, and why I believe the dismissal of Drake's lawsuit was wrong. I'm not saying that Drake should have, I'm not saying that the judge should have, you know, declared Drake the winner the other day. I'm not saying that. I'm saying she shouldn't have dismissed it, though. There was no reason to dismiss it. Okay. The judge used as references to judge a case about hip hop, about battle rap, about, you know, obviously defamation and other things, but centered around hip hop. The judge used as references the Wall Street Journal, BBC News, Forbes, and the Washington Post. You mean she used those as additional references? That's not what I said. I choose my words very carefully. I said she used them as references. That would be the equivalent of me using Vibe Magazine, The Source, Hip Hop Daily News, Hip Hop DX as references for a for a case about someone embezzling money from their company, right? Or a case about someone who poisoned their significant other in an attempt to get the insurance money, right? Those references have literally nothing to do with the cases. Well, but she provided links from each of those sources that did talk about the Drake-Kendrick battle. Well, sure. The Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, BBC News, and Forbes all have sections where they talk about pop culture. But this is a very important court case. And we know that every court case, on some level sets precedent, right? Meaning this court case, assuming that it doesn't get changed at appeal and whatever, can be used in another case down the line. And it doesn't have to be a similar case necessarily. I mean, it may have to be about defamation, but I mean, it may not have to involve rappers. It may not have to involve record labels and so on. Correct? Okay. This judge, not considering the song Like That, which is the actual start of the battle, this judge understanding the importance of the order of the songs, the importance of, the window of time the songs came out, right? The importance of the song Not Like Us, right? And, to the case itself, right? And this judge, the court, using the Wall Street Journal, right, which is a financial publication, BBC News, right, which is a, European publication. Doesn't mean it's not, reputable, but, European publication. Forbes magazine, right? Also a financial publication. And the Washington Post as points of reference to decide this case, right? The combination of all those things I just named are just some of the reasons why, in my opinion, this court, specifically the judge, had no business whatsoever dismissing this case at this point. Absolutely not. What was the point of getting witness list and Drake's legal team having to sort of, prove why each witness was integral to their case? And what was the point of all of that? What was the point of accepting, sworn testimony from Drake saying, or sworn affidavits from Drake saying, hey, I'm willing to prove everything I said in every diss song that I rapped. So if it seems like some incendiary thing that I said something about, Kendrick's manager having fathered one of his children, I'm happy to sit in the witness stand and under oath tell you why I said that. The thing I said about Kendrick being, abusive to his fiance, that may sound like some incendiary thing that rappers say. I will under oath sit down in the witness box and explain why I said that. And I'll provide proof to those two allegations and all the others that I said about Kendrick. I mean, I've never heard of anyone being willing to do something like that. And so for those of you who say, defamation cases, they get thrown out all the time because the burden of proof is just too high to overcome, right? And there's a lot of truth to that, by the way. I'm not saying that that's not true. Surely, Drake's willingness to provide evidence for everything that he said himself about Kendrick and about UMG for that matter has got to be a compelling enough detail of his case that we should have been able to see this thing through until the end. If at the end, after you all have assessed the evidence and what Drake had to say and assessed, his, the witness testimony and so forth, if after that you all go, nah, he still hasn't overcome his burden, right, to prove defamation, I could live with that. But we didn't even get close to that point. And based on just some of the things that I've pointed out, I just feel like it wasn't right. It wasn't right. And the dismissal of his lawsuit was wrong at this stage. And I just feel like at a minimum, he should be allowed to prove his case.